Step back in time and discover what fueled the world's most powerful spiritual leaders each morning. From humble tables to elegant trays, here's every pope's favorite breakfast, starting with Pope Francis. Pope Francis always favored simplicity, and his breakfast reflected that: a cup of strong yerba mate tea and a couple of media lunas, Argentina's beloved crescent pastries. Even after moving to Rome, he stayed loyal to his roots. Yerba mate, served hot and bitter, was both a beverage and a ritual in South America, a symbol of shared community and alertness. The media lunas were lightly sweet, brushed with glaze, and enjoyed warm. On occasion, he added a slice of toast with quince jam or a banana, but his usual fare remained modest. Vatican aides reported that even as Pope, he avoided rich meals in the morning. His breakfast, served early, was taken in silence or while reading scripture. In interviews, he said he saw breakfast as a chance to begin the day grounded and humble. Just like his leadership, it was about presence, not performance. A small cup, a small bite, and a wide-open heart. Hailing from Bavaria, Pope Benedict XVI never strayed far from his homeland's culinary traditions. His favorite breakfast? Simple and hearty, crusty German-style bread rolls, called semmeln, served with fresh butter and fruit jam, often cherry or apricot. Paired with black coffee or a warm herbal infusion, this breakfast was a quiet nod to his roots. In Bavaria, such a breakfast is common, filling without being heavy, flavorful without being rich. Even during his papacy, Benedict preferred it over more elaborate Vatican offerings. When guests joined him, the meal remained modest, with perhaps the addition of yogurt or soft cheese. His preference for this kind of breakfast mirrored his scholarly nature: thoughtful, structured, and deeply rooted in tradition. Vatican cooks quickly learned to bake semmeln fresh each morning just for him. This meal, taken early and without fanfare, was a spiritual warm-up for the day ahead, a quiet communion with the past and the world he quietly led. Born in Wadowice, Poland, Pope John Paul II remained devoted to the tastes of his homeland, even at breakfast. His favorite morning meal included slices of hearty rye bread, mild Polish cold cuts or sausage, and strong black tea with lemon. Occasionally, he'd add a soft-boiled egg or a smear of honey, but his breakfast always kept the simplicity and strength of his Polish upbringing. He often said that the foods of his childhood reminded him of resilience, of wartime meals and communal tables. Vatican chefs imported special bread and cured meats to keep his breakfast authentic. He took meals early, usually alone or with close aides, and preferred not to talk much until after morning prayer. For John Paul II, breakfast wasn't about indulgence. It was nourishment for the body before nourishing others through service. And each bite of rye, each sip of tea, carried the memory of the people who shaped him. But coming up next, a pope who surprised the Vatican with his unexpected taste in coffee, and another who kept his breakfast close to the habits of monks. Though Pope John Paul III served only 33 days as pope, his habits were well known, especially his fondness for a quick, no-fuss breakfast, a single strong espresso, and a crisp almond biscotto. Born in the Veneto region of Italy, he lived modestly as a priest and bishop, and brought those habits into the Vatican. He never cared much for lavish meals, and often skipped breakfast altogether when busy. But when he did eat, it was light and Italian to the core. Something simple, something sweet, and always with strong, hot coffee. Vatican kitchen staff recalled his humility and quiet demeanor, and how he often thanked them personally. He took breakfast early, sometimes standing, always without ceremony. That single biscotto, dipped in espresso, seemed to be all he needed to start the day. It was a breakfast of quiet strength, no frills, just flavor, and a perfect match for the gentle, fleeting spirit of the smiling Pope. Pope Paul VI was a modernizer in many ways, and his breakfast reflected a balance between tradition and post-war wellness trends. He began each day with toasted brioche, plain yogurt, and seasonal fruit, typically apples or figs. Born in Lombardy, he grew up with access to refined northern Italian cuisine, but adopted a restrained lifestyle as pope. He liked things light, nourishing, and consistent. A glass of warm milk or mild tea accompanied the meal, which he usually took alone while reading scripture or Vatican updates. His breakfast mirrored his approach to leadership: dignified, thoughtful, and always mindful of moderation. He preferred the natural sweetness of fruit over pastries, and Vatican aides knew not to overwhelm his tray with excess. Paul VI was deeply spiritual, and each bite, calmly chewed, quietly appreciated, was part of a contemplative rhythm. It wasn't just about food. It was about intention. His breakfast, like his papacy, was measured with purpose. If you could share breakfast with any historical figure, pope or otherwise, who would it be and what would you serve? Let us know your dream breakfast table in the comments below. Pope John XXIII, affectionately known as Good Pope John, loved rustic traditional food, and breakfast was no exception. His favorite morning meal included soft-boiled eggs, a hunk of country-style bread, and a handful of black olives or tomato slices on the side. Raised in the Bergamo countryside, Angelo Roncalli grew up with farm-fresh meals, and he carried that love for simplicity into the apostolic palace. He requested bread from northern Italian bakeries and preferred olive oil to butter. While he rarely deviated from this routine, he welcomed the occasional bowl of warm soup on cold mornings. Those who served him noted his cheerful gratitude and how he often blessed the kitchen staff personally. His breakfast table was quiet, prayerful, and full of warmth. Just like his papacy, it was nourishing in spirit as well as substance. It wasn't fancy, but it filled the room with peace, gratitude, and a distinctly pastoral joy. Next up, a pope whose mornings began with café au lait, and another who asked for bread so dry it surprised even the chefs. These breakfasts are getting interesting. Pope Pius XII was known for his intellectual rigor, diplomatic precision, and unusually minimal breakfasts. Each morning he began his day with a large café latte and a few pieces of pan secco, or dry bread. No butter, no jam, and absolutely no adornment. It was a choice that surprised even his papal kitchen staff, who expected requests for rich Roman fare. But the Pope preferred austerity. Raised in an upper-class Roman family, Eugenio Pacelli was surrounded by formality, but lived with deep internal discipline. His breakfast mirrored that, refined, strict, and deeply rooted in routine. He often sipped his coffee while reviewing diplomatic cables or preparing for morning mass. Occasionally, if guests were present, fruit might be served, but for himself, it was always the same: bread, coffee, silence. In many ways, this stark breakfast reflected his papacy during World War II, one of restraint, internal struggle, and unwavering duty. Even at breakfast, he was quietly preparing for battle. Pope Pius XI, born Achille Ratti in the Lombard Alps, kept a hearty mountain man's appetite, even in the Vatican. His favorite breakfast? A bowl of warm polenta, softened with milk and drizzled with honey. It was filling, rural, and uniquely northern Italian. This wasn't a trendy dish, it was survival food turned soul food. The cornmeal base reminded him of his early years hiking alpine paths and studying theology in cold monasteries. Even after becoming pope, he insisted on traditional northern fare in the mornings. Served in simple bowls, often with a spoon carved from olive wood, the breakfast was sometimes accompanied by stewed apples or rustic biscuits. The meal energized him before hours of reading, walking, and diplomatic meetings. For a pope known for balancing scholarship with pastoral strength, polenta was the perfect metaphor: solid, reliable, and comforting. Vatican chefs found it odd at first, but for Pius XI, it was more than breakfast. It was home in a bowl. Pope Benedict XV, who led the Church during World War I, had a breakfast routine as unusual as his times. Each morning he began with hard-boiled eggs, a few slices of salted anchovies, and a cup of sweet black tea with lemon. Born into a noble Genoese family, Giacomo della Chiesa grew up by the sea, and anchovies were both staple and delicacy. He liked their brininess against the mildness of eggs, a balance of richness and restraint. His tea, always sweetened, brought a note of comfort to the table. Though unconventional by Roman standards, his breakfast reflected a wartime pope's need for clarity and energy. He reportedly ate early and quickly, often preparing for letters and communiques that would affect nations. Even in such gravity, he appreciated this briny, satisfying meal. Anchovies at the papal table? Unthinkable for some. But for Benedict XV, it was both taste of heritage and a reminder. Strength often comes from the sea's humblest gifts. Coming next, a pope with a sweet tooth for custard, and another who dined like a monk. These final papal breakfasts reveal a whole other side to holy mornings. Pope Pius X, canonized for his humility and reforms, favored a breakfast as gentle as his spirit, a simple bowl of semolina porridge, lightly sweetened and dusted with cinnamon. Born Giuseppe Sarto to a poor family in northern Italy, he never abandoned the peasant foods of his youth. The semolina, slow cooked in milk until thick and smooth, was served warm, never hot, and topped with a whisper of brown sugar or honey. Occasionally, a slice of apple or raisin was stirred in. His preference never changed, even after ascending to the papacy. Vatican cooks initially offered more elaborate fare, but he politely declined. "Like the poor," he once said, "is how I should eat." His papacy emphasized spiritual nourishment and simplicity, and this breakfast mirrored that. No ceremony, no silver trays, just sustenance, gently prepared. Even the cinnamon was a touch from childhood, not luxury. In that quiet bowl, each morning began the same way, humbly, faithfully, and full of grace. Which breakfast on this list surprised you the most, or reminded you of your own traditions? Tell us in the comments which papal meal you'd try on a peaceful morning. Pope Leo XIII lived to be 93 years old, a remarkable feat for any time, and one that Vatican insiders sometimes jokingly attributed to his modest but hearty breakfast: chestnut bread and black coffee. Born in Carpineto Romano, a mountain town in central Italy, he grew up eating chestnut flour loaves, dense, earthy, and rich in nutrition. As Pope, he requested the same rustic bread every morning, often toasted and served with a thin coat of olive oil or fig jam. He paired it with a strong Caffè Nero, no sugar, no milk, just pure, bracing coffee. A scholar and statesman, Leo XIII liked his mornings quiet and structured. He would eat early, read letters and newspapers, and prepare for long days of political writing and doctrinal reflection. His breakfast was part fuel, part memory, part monastic in tone. Though modern tastes may balk at its austerity, his longevity may say otherwise. A peasant's meal? Yes, and perhaps a philosopher's secret weapon. Pope Pius XIX, who served as pope for over 31 years, started nearly every morning with two things: a cup of warm milk sweetened with honey and pane duro, or hardened bread rolls. This old-style Roman breakfast was common in the 1800s, especially for those raised in large families like his own. The milk soothed the stomach, and the bread, often dipped to soften it, provided just enough energy to begin the day. He occasionally added a boiled egg, but never anything extravagant. Pius XIX believed strongly in self-discipline, and his breakfast reflected that principle. Staff noted that he often broke the bread into small pieces slowly, almost meditatively, as he read or prayed. It wasn't a breakfast of power. It was a breakfast of preparation. In fact, some biographers suggest his deep sense of endurance, spiritual and political, was rooted in this early morning ritual. Simple, repetitive, steady, just like the papacy he steered through storms, revolutions, and the birth of modern Italy. But the next popes took breakfast to new places: mountaintop flavors, monastic simplicity, and even barley brews. These upcoming morning rituals reveal how food reflected faith across centuries. Pope Gregory XVI, a Camaldolese monk before his papacy, carried his ascetic habits into the Vatican, especially at the breakfast table. His morning began with a bowl of chestnut porridge, slowly cooked and thinned with warm goat milk. It was a regional dish from the Apennines, where he had spent much of his monastic life. The texture was thick, earthy, and modest, perfect for someone who believed deeply in spiritual simplicity. He disdained excess and discouraged lavish meals for papal staff. Instead, breakfast was taken alone, often in a cell-like chamber within his quarters, accompanied only by scripture or quiet contemplation. Chestnuts, common in poor rural diets, symbolized humility and endurance, two values Gregory XVI espoused both personally and politically. While critics called his rule repressive, his daily habits told a quieter story, one of rootedness, spiritual austerity, and reliance on the humble fruits of the land. Even his breakfast was a theological statement: nourishment, not indulgence. Though his papacy lasted less than 2 years, Pope Pius VIII's preferences were clearly remembered, especially his light pastoral breakfast: a wedge of soft white cheese, a handful of grapes, and dry, unsalted bread. Raised in northern Italy, he had a lifelong love of simple dairy and fruit-based meals. Even as Pope, he avoided anything rich or complex in the morning. His favorite cheese was robiola, a soft, tangy spread common in the countryside. Grapes were symbolic and seasonal, a reminder of both Eucharistic wine and God's abundance. His breakfast was quiet, intentional, and seasonal, served early before prayer and writing. Pius VIII saw food as a reflection of discipline: the sweetness of fruit, the softness of cheese, the crunch of bread. It was the perfect trio of textures and symbols. To him, breakfast wasn't just sustenance, it was gratitude made edible. Even the Vatican kitchen noted how little he requested and how deeply he thanked. Pope Leo XII, known for his conservatism and moral rigor, had a breakfast that echoed monastic roots rather than Roman splendor. Each morning, he sipped barley coffee, a caffeine-free brew made from roasted barley grains, paired with a few delicate almond biscuits. This substitute for traditional coffee was common among the clergy, especially in monasteries, where stimulants were often frowned upon. Leo XII found comfort in its toasted, nutty taste. The almond biscuits were made with only egg whites, ground almonds, and sugar, light but satisfying, a whisper of sweetness without indulgence. He often ate while standing, preferring to focus on scripture or state papers before morning audiences. The breakfast reflected his papacy, traditional, unembellished, and guided by spiritual vigilance. No meat, no cheeses, no lavish spreads, just the basics, handled with care. Even his personal cooks noted how rarely he asked for change. He viewed breakfast as duty, not delight, but the almond scent always softened his stern morning silhouette. Coming up, one pope who loved citrus on toast, and another whose breakfast came straight from a convent bakery. The next entries are full of tradition, flavor, and sacred simplicity. Imprisoned by Napoleon and exiled from Rome, Pope Pius VII endured much hardship, but he never lost his taste for a breakfast of citrus marmalade on toasted bread. Made from bitter oranges grown in the Vatican gardens or brought from Sicily, the marmalade was thick, slightly tart, and always handmade. He favored it atop pain integral, a rustic wheat loaf toasted until golden. Alongside it, he'd take a small ceramic cup of warm water with a splash of lemon. The entire meal was light and refreshing, intended to awaken body and mind without burdening them. Even during captivity in France, he requested marmalade if available, considering it not a luxury, but a taste of home and peace. The balance of bitter and sweet reflected his personality, calm under pressure, quietly enduring, and always hopeful. Vatican records noted that marmalade was often made in batches by nuns, then preserved in glass jars marked "For His Holiness." Best known for dissolving the Jesuit order, had a softer side, especially at breakfast. His favorite morning meal featured pan di latte, milk bread, gently warmed and served with convent-made jam. Strawberry, fig, or plum preserves were most common, delivered weekly by cloistered sisters who ran a nearby orphanage. Clement XIV valued their labor, and would often send handwritten notes of gratitude in return. The milk bread, slightly sweet, fluffy, and white, was served plain, with no butter, keeping the focus on the jam's flavor. His drink of choice? A light herbal infusion, usually chamomile. This gentle, comforting breakfast mirrored his quiet demeanor. Though he navigated political storms and theological controversies, Clement XIV found peace in ritual and modesty. He reportedly refused silver platters and ornate trays, preferring simple ceramic dishes. His breakfast was a pause before the politics, a moment of sweetness in a papacy that required constant poise. Pope Benedict XIV, one of the Enlightenment's most learned pontiffs, enjoyed a breakfast that reflected his cultured palate and Roman heritage. Fresh ricotta, drizzled with acacia honey and sprinkled with crushed walnuts. Born in Bologna, he cherished food that balanced tradition and nourishment. Ricotta, delivered fresh each morning from a local dairy, was served at room temperature in a shallow bowl. The honey added golden sweetness, while walnuts brought texture and warmth. Benedict XIV believed in moderation, but never denied the beauty of simple pleasures. He often paired this meal with a glass of diluted red wine or barley tea, depending on the season. He'd eat while reading theological essays, and occasionally shared a spoonful with guests, especially visiting scholars or diplomats. This wasn't just breakfast, it was dialogue in edible form. Rich in symbolism, the trio of ingredients represented purity, divine sweetness, and wisdom, a meal as thoughtful as the man who enjoyed it. Next, a pope who took his breakfast in silence, and another who believed morning meals should be shared. These final two reveal the heart behind the habit. Pope Innocent XIII lived and ruled with deep austerity. Each morning his breakfast consisted of plain gruel, a thin porridge made from oats or barley, and a single glass of cold water. No sugar, no fruit, no milk. The gruel was slow-cooked and unseasoned, served in an earthenware bowl. He reportedly ate it standing, in silence, after morning prayer. This Spartan choice stemmed from his belief in daily penance and spiritual detachment from luxury. While Vatican staff offered to improve the meal, he consistently declined. He considered his breakfast not just a meal, but a sacrificial act. Though his papacy was relatively brief and marked by controversy, his morning discipline was never questioned. For Innocent XIII, denying himself even the smallest comfort at dawn was a way to align body with spirit. Gruel and water may seem bleak, but for him, it was clarity, and perhaps in that daily discipline, he found a strength others never noticed. Pope Clement XI began each day not alone, but in quiet fellowship. His preferred breakfast included fresh bread, slices of young pecorino cheese, and ripe pears, often shared with a secretary, scholar, or visiting cleric. Born to an aristocratic Roman family, Clement XI saw food as a form of hospitality, especially in the morning, when minds were clear and hearts open. He believed in conversation over coffee and ideas over indulgence. The pears were picked from the Vatican gardens or gifted by countryside parishes. The bread was warm, the cheese soft, and the mood reflective. Occasionally, a light red wine was served with water. These small meals turned into informal councils, moments of intellectual and spiritual exchange. In a time when breakfast was often solitary, Clement XI made it communal. It was nourishment, yes, but also invitation. To him, sharing food was sharing grace. And in every simple bite, the bonds of the Church grew just a little stronger. Serving as Pope during the tumultuous Vatican II era, Pope Pius XII reportedly favored zabaglione, a warm, velvety custard made from egg yolks, sugar, and Marsala wine. This traditional Italian dessert, often served in delicate glasses or over fresh berries, symbolized both indulgence and simplicity. Pius XII, known for his ascetic nature, wasn't prone to excess, but zabaglione was the kind of humble luxury he appreciated. It reminded him of Roman roots and childhood dinners, where a spoonful of this creamy dish marked the end of a feast. Zabaglione's gentle sweetness, made without flour or heavy creams, mirrored the Pope's preference for spiritual and culinary purity. While little documentation exists on his personal diet, Vatican chefs noted his fondness for desserts that were elegant but restrained. Today, zabaglione is rarely served outside of Italy, but perhaps it's time to rediscover the subtle sophistication of this papal favorite, because sometimes the holiest tastes come in the lightest of spoonfuls. Pope John XXIII, affectionately called the Good Pope, brought warmth and accessibility to the Vatican, and his favorite dessert reflected that same humble spirit. He adored classic vanilla gelato paired with ripe figs, a simple yet rich nod to his Bergamasco roots. Raised in a large farming family, he valued meals that honored the land and seasons. Gelato reminded him of summers in northern Italy, while figs symbolized abundance and peace. Visitors to the Apostolic Palace often recalled his delight when served this treat, especially when the figs were fresh from the papal gardens. Unlike elaborate pastries, this combination required no pretense, just clean, comforting flavor. His love for this dessert wasn't about indulgence, it was about remembering where he came from. Even as he opened the Church to the modern world through Vatican II, he stayed grounded in tradition. And in that tradition, a dish of gelato and figs was more than dessert. It was gratitude, served cold and sweet. Paul VI, introspective and intellectual, preferred the earthy sweetness of castagnaccio, a rustic Tuscan chestnut cake made with chestnut flour, olive oil, rosemary, and pine nuts. Born near Brescia in northern Italy, he was no stranger to modest mountain flavors, and castagnaccio was a childhood staple during cooler months. Dense and subtly sweet, this dessert aligned with Paul VI's minimalist tastes and meditative lifestyle. While not everyone loved its unique texture or herbal aroma, it resonated deeply with him, perhaps because it stood apart, just like his papacy. He once remarked that simplicity is not to be feared, and his dessert of choice embodied that perfectly. Though rarely served in modern restaurants, castagnaccio was a quiet declaration of flavor, without fanfare. For Paul VI, this wasn't a treat meant to dazzle. It was nourishment for both body and soul. Eating it was almost contemplative, and in every pine nut and hint of rosemary, you could taste reflection. But next, we're stepping into a dessert that delighted crowds, just like the Pope who adored it. Get ready for flaky layers, powdered sugar, and a truly sweet legacy. Though his papacy lasted only 33 days, Pope John Paul I left behind memories of warmth, humility, and a fondness for millefoli, Italy's take on the Napoleon pastry, with crisp layers of puff pastry and creamy custard in between, topped with a dusting of powdered sugar. It was a dessert that matched his personality, layered, light, and loved by many. Born in the Veneto region, millefoli was a celebration cake often served at local festivals and family gatherings. For Albino Luciani, as he was known before the papacy, it wasn't about extravagance. It was about joy. When served millefoglie in the apostolic palace, he reportedly chuckled at how it always crumbled in his hands, saying, "Even saints make a mess." Despite his brief time as pontiff, his approachable spirit lives on, and millefoglie, though humble in origin, became a fitting final sweet. It reminded everyone that happiness can be fleeting, but still sweet enough to savor, if only for a moment. When Pope John Paul II mentioned kremovka during a visit to his hometown of Wadowice, Poland, the dessert became legendary overnight. After graduation, he said, "We went for kremovka." The crowd erupted, and soon, so did bakeries across Poland, rushing to recreate the Pope's favorite childhood treat. Known locally as kremovka papieska, it's a Polish cream cake layered with puff pastry and rich vanilla custard, often topped with powdered sugar. Unlike most papal desserts, this one became a national phenomenon, with fans lining up to taste the Pope's pastry. For John Paul II, it wasn't about the sugar, it was about memory, about friends, freedom, and a quiet moment before adulthood began. His affection for kremovka gave the dessert a spiritual quality. Suddenly, it symbolized youth, resilience, and the simplicity of joy. In a life marked by global travels and moral leadership, this unassuming cake remained his sweetest link to home. Have you ever tried kremovka or another dessert tied to your childhood? What sweet treat instantly takes you back? Share your memory in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Born Joseph Ratzinger in Bavaria, Pope Benedict XVI had a well-known fondness for a German classic, Black Forest cake. Layered with chocolate sponge, whipped cream, sour cherries, and a hint of Kirsch, cherry liqueur, this dessert was as rich in flavor as it was in memory. As a child, it was a festive centerpiece at birthdays and holidays. Even as Pope, Benedict's eyes would light up when served a carefully prepared slice during special occasions. He appreciated the craftsmanship, the balance of tart and sweet, the meticulous layers, the visual elegance. Vatican chefs noted that he favored it without excess alcohol, preferring the cherries to shine. While Benedict's public image leaned toward the academic and reserved, his favorite dessert told a different story, one of warmth, tradition, and rooted joy. Today, Black Forest cake remains a symbol of celebration in Germany, and for Pope Benedict, it was a sweet taste of home, no matter how far he traveled. Coming up next, a pope whose favorite treat was refreshingly frozen, and one who made room at the table for everyone, even when dessert came with a side of humility. As the first pope from Latin America, Pope Francis brought Argentinian flavor to the Vatican, including his lifelong love for dulce de leche. But not just any form. He's said to especially enjoy it swirled into creamy gelato. This frozen fusion of Italian and Argentinian tradition suits the pontiff perfectly, grounded in heritage, but open to the world. Raised in Buenos Aires, Jorge Mario Bergoglio would have enjoyed dulce de leche growing up on toast, in pastries, or drizzled over flan. In Rome, Vatican chefs adapted it into gelato form, cool, comforting, and rich with caramelized sweetness. Unlike the more decadent papal desserts of the past, this one is quietly indulgent and widely accessible, just like the man himself. Pope Francis is known for simplicity, humility, and joy, and dulce de leche gelato fits that spirit. No pretense, just sweetness that lingers. Whether he's greeting crowds or praying in silence, you can imagine him ending a long day with one grateful spoonful. Pope Pius XI, who led the Church from 1922 to 1939, favored strong, classic flavors, and his dessert of choice reflected that. Panforte, a dense, spiced Italian fruitcake packed with nuts, candied citrus, honey, and warm spices, Panforte originated in Siena and dates back to the 13th century. Known for its longevity and boldness, it was traditionally made for pilgrims and royals, so it felt fitting for a man who expanded the Church's global mission. While not flashy, Panforte is enduring and complex, just like Pius XI's papacy, which navigated the Lateran Treaty and the rise of modern political powers. Vatican kitchens would serve thin slices of Panforte during feast days or after formal dinners, and the Pope reportedly appreciated its peppery bite and robust texture. It wasn't dessert for dessert's sake, it was tradition. And for Pius XI, it echoed his love for history, strength, and the kind of sweetness earned, not expected. A true bite of legacy. Serving into his 90s, the oldest pope in modern history, Pope Leo XIII was a man of stamina, intellect, and refinement. His favorite dessert? Marrons glacés, or candied chestnuts. This delicacy, especially popular in France and northern Italy during the 19th century, involves painstakingly candying chestnuts in sugar syrup over several days until they become glossy, jewel-like morsels. As a young man in the Papal States, Leo XIII experienced these sweets during holidays and diplomatic banquets. He appreciated their elegance and restraint, sweet but not overpowering, soft yet firm, simple yet luxurious. Marrons glacés were often served on silver trays in the Vatican during Christmas time or papal receptions. For Leo XIII, who balanced spiritual depth with political savvy, they embodied the perfect fusion of earth and grace. Today, they're a rare treat, but they once graced the lips of a pope who believed deeply in the power of thoughtful tradition. Every chestnut held a century of care. Next, we meet a pope who favored Bavarian simplicity, and another whose childhood favorite became the most symbolic dessert of his reign. Get ready for comfort food, papal style. Pope Pius X, canonized as a saint and remembered for his deep humility, had simple tastes, even when it came to dessert. His favorite? A bowl of creamy rice pudding, gently flavored with lemon zest. Born in rural Italy, Giuseppe Sarto grew up in a modest family where luxuries were rare. Rice pudding was a comforting dish made from pantry staples: milk, sugar, arborio rice, sometimes enriched with a little egg yolk or cinnamon. But it was the fresh lemon peel, added during the final stir, that made it special for him. Even after rising to the highest office in the church, Pius X preferred peasant food over gourmet fare. He saw no need for indulgence, yet found deep satisfaction in what was honest and nourishing. Vatican chefs respected his preferences, often preparing this dish on feast days or in quiet moments. For Pius X, this humble dessert mirrored his life: simple, sincere, and quietly full of grace. What's the simplest dessert you've ever loved? One that brings comfort more than wow. Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear which humble sweets mean the most to you. Pope Clement XIV, who led the Church during the turbulent late 18th century, was known for his love of quiet mornings and thoughtful conversation. His dessert of choice? Ciambella, a classic Italian breakfast cake shaped like a ring, mildly sweet and perfect for dipping into coffee or wine. Made from flour, eggs, sugar, and lemon, sometimes flavored with anise or rum, ciambella was a rustic treat common in Roman households. Clement XIV reportedly enjoyed slices after long walks in the Vatican gardens or while meeting with scholars. Unlike the rich custards or elaborate pastries of his time, ciambella was unfussy and sincere. It was a dessert that spoke not of status, but of stability, something to be shared with visitors, cardinals, or even servants. The ring shape, symbolizing eternity, added quiet symbolism to each bite. Today, ciambella still lives on in Italian kitchens, but its quiet dignity, as a papal favorite, adds another layer to its enduring appeal. In the Baroque-era papacy of Urban VIII, a time of grand cathedrals and artistic brilliance, his favorite dessert was surprisingly simple: crostata di ricotta e miele, a rustic tart made with fresh ricotta cheese and honey. Though born into the powerful Barberini family, Urban VIII held fond memories of rural life and monastic kitchens where such desserts were common. The crostata, often encased in a buttery pastry shell and lightly perfumed with lemon or orange zest, combined natural sweetness with creamy texture. Vatican records suggest he requested it during Easter and Pentecost feasts, often shared with visiting diplomats and clerics. The use of honey, symbolic of divine sweetness, gave the dish spiritual resonance too. For a pope known for commissioning works by Bernini and Caravaggio, this humble tart served as a reminder. Beauty also exists in simplicity. The crostata wasn't ostentatious, it was grounding, a golden slice of pastoral peace in the midst of Rome's grandeur. Coming next, a pontiff who paired dessert with diplomacy, and one whose sweet tooth surprised even those closest to him. Their favorites? Full of charm, culture, and timeless flavor. Pope Innocent XI, remembered for his austere lifestyle and commitment to reform, unsurprisingly favored one of Italy's simplest desserts: almond biscotti. These twice-baked cookies, known in Tuscany as cantuccini, are crisp, not overly sweet, and often enjoyed dipped in vinsanto or a morning cafe. Born in Como, Innocent XI brought a northern practicality to the papacy and often refused lavish feasts. Still, he allowed himself the occasional biscotto with afternoon tea, a small joy in a life guided by restraint. Made from flour, eggs, sugar, and roasted almonds, These cookies were humble, hearty, and enduring, just like the man who enjoyed them. Vatican kitchens, aware of his preferences, prepared fresh batches regularly, keeping them in tins for quick service to guests or papal visits. While other popes preferred custards or cakes, Innocent XI's biscotti choice felt like a message. Sweetness doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it's best when it crunches gently, lingers a little, and invites one more thoughtful bite. Pope Benedict XV, who led the Church during World War I, was a man of deep empathy and delicate taste, and his favorite dessert reflected that duality. Granita di caffè con panna, a semi-frozen coffee granita, topped with whipped cream. A Sicilian classic that spread to Rome in the early 1900s, this icy treat offered a moment of brightness in a dark era. He enjoyed the bold bitterness of the coffee, softened by the sweet cream, often served in small silver bowls during hot afternoons or after long meetings with diplomats. Unlike richer desserts, granita required no excess, just precision, patience, and good ingredients. Benedict XV's legacy includes tireless efforts toward peace and humanitarian aid, but in quiet moments, this dessert gave him pause. The contrast of cold and smooth, sharp and sweet, mirrored his papacy, one of challenge met with compassion. Granita is fleeting, refreshing, and sharp on the tongue, like hope cutting through uncertainty, one chilled spoonful at a time. Pope Alexander VII, a Baroque figure known for both spiritual ambition and refined aesthetic taste, enjoyed a dessert that matched his artistic sensibilities: candied orange peel. This delicacy, often made in Roman monasteries, involved carefully simmering orange rinds in syrup until translucent and fragrant, then drying and dusting them with sugar. It was a sophisticated treat, fragrant, bittersweet, and full of symbolism. Orange peel represented renewal, clarity, and temperance in Christian lore, and Alexander VII reportedly received boxes from cloistered nuns who specialized in confectionery. He savored them slowly, often while reading or dictating letters. The dessert aligned perfectly with his dual identity. Lover of grandeur, he commissioned Bernini's colonnade in St. Peter's Square, yet committed to spiritual focus. Today, candied citrus often gets overlooked, but for Alexander VII, these shimmering slivers of fruit held meaning beyond taste. They were meditative, a quiet, fragrant reminder that sweetness often comes from the bitterest beginnings. Have you ever tried a traditional European dessert with religious or cultural meaning? What did it taste like, and what did it remind you of? Share your story in the comments below. Pope Gregory XVI, a contemplative and scholarly pontiff of the early 19th century, reportedly favored the refined simplicity of pere al vino rosso, pears poached in red wine, spiced with cinnamon and cloves. This elegant dessert, often served chilled with a light syrup reduction, was a favorite in monastic kitchens and Roman villas alike. Gregory XVI's monastic background shaped his modest palate, but poached pears offered balance. Fruit of the earth, transformed through patient care. Vatican chefs prepared it with seasonal pears from nearby orchards, allowing the wine and spices to infuse the fruit with warmth and depth. Unlike richer desserts, this one emphasized restraint, sweetness without overindulgence. Served at private dinners and feast days, it mirrored Gregory XVI's views on temperance and tradition. Today, this classic is rarely linked to papal kitchens, but it was once the chosen finale for a pope who believed in structure, order, and the slow unfolding of grace, bite by spiced bite. No flour, no fire, just nature, arranged with meaning. His cooks sourced figs from Vatican gardens and local farms, pairing them with golden honey from Lazio, and cracked walnuts roasted for flavor. It wasn't just a sweet, it was a reminder of classical ideals, of nature as divine art. For Julius II, who ruled with force and vision, this dish was a brief return to stillness, the taste of Eden on the tongue, in a world he was busy rebuilding. Pope Sixtus V, a builder and reformer in late 16th century Rome, had a taste for desserts that combined bold flavor and deep tradition, like crostata di ricotta e mosto d'uva. This tart blended creamy ricotta with reduced grape must, a thick, sweet syrup made from freshly pressed wine grapes. Popular among Central Italian farmers and monastic bakers, it was served during harvest festivals and high feasts. Sixtus V, who rose from humble shepherd to papal power, loved the contrast. Rustic roots meeting refined execution. The grape must added a deep purple hue and tangy sweet depth, while the ricotta softened the edge. Vatican records suggest this tart was served during vintage season gatherings, shared with bishops and ambassadors. For Sixtus V, it was more than dessert. It was legacy. Like his sweeping infrastructure reforms and Vatican renovations, it transformed raw ingredients into enduring beauty, a tart that could hold its own on a silver tray or a farmer's table. Our final popes chose sweets that sparked smiles and set trends, one beloved by nuns across Europe, and one linked to childhood joy on the streets of Buenos Aires. Pope Clement VIII is best known for endorsing coffee, but his sweet preference leaned towards something more playful: marzipan fruits. These almond paste confections, hand-shaped and hand-painted to resemble apples, pears, oranges, and figs, were popularized by Sicilian nuns and quickly became papal table staples. Clement VIII, a patron of art and detail, admired their craftsmanship as much as their taste. They were tiny works of edible sculpture, delicate, fragrant, and surprising in their realism. Often presented in decorative boxes or on silver platters, they added charm and festivity to papal banquets. Beyond their sweetness, marzipan fruits held symbolic weight, fruits of knowledge, generosity, and abundance. For a pope navigating tensions between reform and tradition, these clever confections offered joy and lightness. Today, they're mostly reserved for holidays like All Saints' Day, but once, they graced the tables of the Vatican and delighted a pope whose faith included room for whimsy, a dessert that was also devotion in miniature form. While dulce de leche gelato may be his favorite dessert today, Pope Francis has never lost affection for medialunas, Argentina's beloved crescent pastries. Lighter and sweeter than French croissants, medialunas are brushed with glaze and perfect alongside mate or coffee. As a child in Buenos Aires, Jorge Mario Bergoglio enjoyed them at cafes and church functions alike. Even as Pope, he's mentioned them fondly in interviews, evoking the comfort of ordinary mornings. Medialunas represent joy without extravagance, a people's pastry, accessible and familiar. Vatican staff have occasionally served Argentine-style breakfasts on special feast days, including the flaky, buttery crescents that take him back home. Francis's love for them fits perfectly with his papacy, grounded, simple, and centered on community. He doesn't need a gold-plated dessert cart, just a warm pastry and a hot drink, shared with others. Medialunas remind us that sweetness isn't always rare or expensive. Sometimes it's what you've eaten 1,000 times, with love. Which of these papal desserts would you love to try? Or have you already tasted one? Share your favorite or your own family's sacred sweet in the comments below. Known for his humility and simple lifestyle, Pope Francis preferred meals that reflected his Argentine roots. Throughout his papacy, he never lost his love for empanadas, flaky pastries filled with meat, onions, and spices. Often paired with yerba mate, a traditional South American tea, these comfort foods were his go-to tastes of home. While living in the Vatican, he kept his meals light and straightforward, reportedly enjoying fruits, grilled fish, and the occasional dulce de leche dessert. But when he felt nostalgic or shared a bite with visitors from Argentina, empanadas often took center stage. His preference for modest food echoed his values: less excess, more connection. Even his papal apartment was modest. He chose a small room at the Casa Santa Marta, over the Grand Apostolic Palace. In a world of rich cuisine, Francis reminded us that sometimes the most meaningful meals are the ones that feel like home. Born Joseph Ratzinger in Bavaria, Pope Benedict XVI brought a taste of southern Germany to the Vatican. Even during his papacy, he remained fond of his homeland's traditional fare, especially Bavarian sausages, soft pretzels, and apple strudel. His favorites were simple but hearty, often featuring classic combinations like Weisswurst, white sausage, with sweet mustard and fresh pretzels. Though the Vatican kitchen prepared a wide range of dishes, Pope Benedict preferred modest meals rooted in tradition, often washed down with a small glass of beer. Yes, beer. His brother once joked that he was happiest with a pretzel in one hand and a theological book in the other. His love of familiar flavors served as a link to his upbringing and personal history. Though deeply intellectual and reserved, his food preferences revealed a fondness for warmth, routine, and a touch of German comfort. Even in Rome, the Pope from Bavaria stayed true to his culinary roots. Pope John Paul II, born Karol Józef Wojtyła, never forgot the flavors of Poland. His papacy spanned decades, but his favorite foods remained delightfully down to earth. He loved pierogi, dumplings filled with potato, cheese, or sauerkraut, and kremówka, a Polish cream cake famously linked to his youth. After surviving World War II and rising through the church, he carried the warmth of Polish kitchens with him to the Vatican. Pierogi reminded him of family meals, Lenten traditions, and humble celebrations. But Kremovka held legendary status. He once revealed he and his friends had an eating contest with them after graduation. That simple memory turned the dessert into a national favorite. Despite Vatican protocol, he often requested traditional dishes from Krakow on feast days or birthdays. His joy in food reflected his joy in people, culture, and resilience. For many, John Paul II was a spiritual giant, but at dinner, he was a Polish son, hungry for home. But not all papal plates were so indulgent. Our next pope preferred the humblest dish in Roman cuisine. Pope Paul VI, known for his quiet strength and deep intellect, favored a dish as modest as his personality: minestrone soup. A rustic blend of vegetables, beans, and pasta, minestrone was the comfort food he returned to again and again during his papacy. Though he was born near Brescia in northern Italy, he adopted many Roman customs, including a love for traditional cucina povera, peasant cooking. Vatican chefs reportedly kept minestrone on regular rotation in his weekly meals. Its earthy, nourishing quality mirrored Paul VI's approach to leadership: practical, thoughtful, and focused on essentials. Even on papal feast days, his meals remained restrained. This was the pope who preferred reflection over spectacle, and his food choices reflected that humility. While others dined on multi-course banquets, Paul VI was content with a warm bowl of soup and a slice of bread. In the grandeur of the Vatican, he chose simplicity, not just in action, but in every spoonful. Pope John XXIII, affectionately known as Good Pope John, had a deep love for polenta with stew, a staple from his native Bergamo in northern Italy. Born into a large, poor farming family, he grew up on hearty peasant-style meals, dishes designed to feed many with few ingredients. Even after becoming pope, he requested humble foods that reminded him of his youth. Polenta, a cornmeal base similar to grits, was often paired with rabbit, beef, or veal stew in his home region. John XXIII favored it with slow-cooked meat and a bit of grated cheese. Despite his high office, he maintained a disarming warmth and down-to-earth nature, which extended right to his dinner table. Guests were sometimes surprised by how simple his meals were. "I'm just a country priest," he liked to say, and his food choices never strayed far from that image. In many ways, he brought the farmhouse kitchen right into the apostolic palace. Did your family ever cook one of these papal favorites at home, or do any of them surprise you? Let us know in the comments. Pope Pius XII was a reserved and highly disciplined leader, but when it came to food, he did have one indulgence: zabaglione. This light, creamy Italian dessert, made from egg yolks, sugar, and sweet wine, usually marsala, was served warm and frothy, almost like a custard cloud. It wasn't overly rich or decadent, aligning well with his austere persona, yet it offered just enough elegance to satisfy his rare sweet cravings. Born Eugenio Pacelli in Rome, he came from a noble background and was no stranger to refined tastes, though he preferred to keep his papal meals light, structured, and consistent. Zabaglione was often served as an end-of-week treat or on holidays, a gentle reward after a rigid schedule. It's said he enjoyed it spooned over fruit or with a crisp biscuit on the side. For a pope often seen as solemn, his fondness for this airy dessert revealed a rare softness and a moment of sweet simplicity amid weighty global affairs. Born Achille Ratti in the Lombard city of Desio, had a fondness for risotto alla Milanese, a saffron-infused rice dish beloved in northern Italy. Creamy, golden, and fragrant, this risotto was often served with ossobuco or simply topped with grated Parmigiano Reggiano. It reflected his Milanese heritage and reminded him of home during his years in the Vatican. Known for his scholarly intellect and mountain climbing hobby, Pius XI had hearty tastes and a love for regional rustic cuisine. He often asked for traditional meals prepared in simple ways, eschewing the elaborate French-influenced dishes that were once common in papal kitchens. Risotto alla Milanese wasn't just food, it was comfort, identity, and memory on a plate. The warm yellow rice mirrored the Pope's quiet strength and subtle sophistication. Even in a palace, he kept a piece of Lombardy close, with every spoonful laced with flavor, tradition, and a thread of saffron-colored nostalgia. Pope Benedict XV led the Church through World War I, a time of hardship, rationing, and loss. Fittingly, his favorite meal was one of Italy's simplest, pasta al pomodoro. Just pasta, tomatoes, garlic, olive oil, and basil. This humble dish symbolized both survival and serenity. Born Giacomo della Chiesa in Genoa, Benedict XV came from nobility, but lived with the humility of a pastor. During the war years, he advocated for peace, humanitarian aid, and simplicity, which extended to his own lifestyle. Papal cooks noted he preferred unfussy, traditional meals, even refusing elaborate dinners on feast days. Pasta al pomodoro was often served at lunch with a slice of rustic bread and seasonal fruit. It was the food of the people, and he embraced it as such. His choice reminds us that in times of global crisis, even the smallest comforts, a warm bowl of pasta, can carry deep meaning. Pope Pius X, born Giuseppe Sarto, hailed from a poor family in the Veneto region of Italy, and his favorite meal reflected that heritage: polenta with roasted game. A firm believer in humility and frugality, Pius X never let his papal title change his rustic tastes. He loved simple, hearty dishes, and polenta, thick golden cornmeal, was a staple from his boyhood. When paired with roasted quail or pheasant, often seasoned with rosemary and garlic, it became a countryside feast. Even after ascending to the highest office in the church, he often requested this modest pairing. Papal chefs would source game from nearby estates and prepare it in the old Venetian style. It was a far cry from the refined dishes favored in the 1800s, but it fit the man who walked to school barefoot and refused extravagance. His meals were not about show, they were about soul. Each bite spoke of resilience, faith, and gratitude for the basics. Pope Leo XIII, who reigned well into his 90s, was a man of stamina, strategy, and strong personal discipline. His favorite meal? Stracciatella, a Roman-style chicken broth with egg drops, gently whisked in with grated cheese and a touch of nutmeg. It was warm, light, and nourishing, ideal for his slender build and advanced age. Born Vincenzo Gioacchino Pecci, he came from Carpineto Romano and embraced regional Roman cooking. Stracciatella was typically served as a first course in Lazio, offering comfort and strength without heaviness. It's no surprise that such a focused, philosophical leader preferred something that fed both body and clarity of mind. Vatican records suggest he asked for this dish often, especially in his later years, when he maintained a surprisingly full schedule and sharp intellect. His love of this humble soup reflected a common papal theme: strength through simplicity. Which papal dish so far would you most love to try, or do any remind you of your own family's favorites? Let us know in the comments. Pope Pius XIX, the longest reigning pope in history, had a taste for the bold and briny. His favorite? Salt cod stewed with tomatoes, olives, and capers, a southern Italian classic known as baccalà alla napoletana. Though he was born in Senegalia in central Italy, Pius IX developed a deep appreciation for Neapolitan flavors during his ecclesiastical career. Salt cod, once seen as a food of the poor, became his go-to dish during Fridays and Lent. It was simple, deeply flavorful, and in line with church fasting rules. The cod was soaked to remove excess salt, then simmered with garlic, olive oil, ripe tomatoes, and a handful of capers or black olives for that trademark Mediterranean punch. Papal chefs recorded this as one of his most frequent requests, especially during Advent. In an era of complex court cuisine, this choice showed his connection to everyday Italian tables, hearty and steeped in tradition. Pope Gregory XVI was a scholarly, contemplative figure, deeply traditional and fond of monastic simplicity. His favorite food? Chestnut soup, a creamy, earthy dish common in the hills of northern and central Italy. Born Bartolomeo Capillari in Belluno, he grew up near the Dolomites, where chestnuts were a winter staple. For many mountain communities, chestnuts were considered the bread of the poor, used in everything from cakes to flour. Gregory XVI favored them in soup form, slow-cooked with onions, garlic, broth, and a drizzle of olive oil. It was warm, filling, and quietly luxurious without extravagance. Monks from the Camaldolese tradition, his order, often prepared it during fasts or feast days. While other popes leaned toward meat or wine, Gregory preferred simple fare that mirrored his ascetic ideals. In the marble halls of the Vatican, he kept the heart of a hermit. But not all papal favorites were Italian. Our next entry takes us far from Rome to a dish with French flair. Pope Pius VII, born in Cesena, Italy, spent much of his papacy embroiled with Napoleon, and ironically, his favorite dish had French origins, coq au vin. This rustic classic, made by braising rooster in red wine with garlic, mushrooms, onions, and herbs, reflected his diplomatic and difficult relationship with France. Though not a gourmet in the traditional sense, Pius VII appreciated dishes with depth and history. He reportedly encountered coq au vin during negotiations and exile in France, where it became a rare comfort during turbulent times. Vatican chefs eventually adopted the dish into papal menus, adapting it with local wine and poultry. Served on special occasions, it was a rich, hearty contrast to the simplicity favored by earlier popes. The slow-simmered, bold flavors matched the slow, tense pace of his historic conflicts, and perhaps gave him the strength for his legendary confrontations with Napoleon. In every bite was a taste of survival, compromise, and unexpected appreciation. Though his papacy was brief and politically fraught, Pope Clement XIV had a strong preference for a bold, distinctly Roman dish: grilled eel with herbs. This dish, traditionally eaten around Christmas and New Year in Italy, was one of Clement's favorites even outside the holiday season. The eel was marinated in vinegar, olive oil, garlic, rosemary, and bay leaf, then grilled until the skin was crisp and the flesh tender. Born in Sant'Arcangelo di Romagna, Clement grew up with Adriatic seafood, but developed a specific fondness for Roman-style eel upon settling in the capital. Vatican chefs noted that he appreciated foods with strong flavors and rustic origins, often requesting seasonal produce and freshwater fish. Eel may seem unusual today, but for centuries it was a prized delicacy, especially in religious households avoiding red meat during fasts. Clement's table reflected his refined palate and deep connection to Italian culinary tradition, right down to the slippery centerpiece. An intellectual and bon vivant, Pope Benedict XIV had a genuine love for food, especially from his home region of Emilia-Romagna. His ultimate favorite? Aged Parmigiano Reggiano, drizzled with traditional balsamic vinegar. Simple yet refined, this combination epitomized his tastes. Born Prospero Lambertini in Bologna, he came from a city known for rich cuisine, and though he ate modestly in public, he took great joy in flavor and tradition. A slice of aged cheese, sharp, nutty, crystalline, paired with the syrupy sweetness of balsamic aged for decades, was a match he reportedly never tired of. He often shared it with visiting dignitaries, praising its balance and spiritual depth. Benedict XIV's wit and warmth earned him admiration across Europe, and his culinary choices reflected that same mix of elegance and accessibility. In the heart of the Vatican, a pope once pondered theology over cheese and vinegar and declared both divinely inspired. Which dish from the 1700s surprised you the most, or sounds most tempting today? Tell us in the comments. Pope Innocent XX's reign was short and his preferences famously austere, but he had one culinary constant: lentil soup with crusty bread. This humble meal reflected his personal discipline and devotion to simplicity. Born Michelangelo dei Conti in the Roman countryside, he was raised on modest fare and kept those habits even after ascending to the papacy. Vatican kitchens were instructed to avoid elaborate dishes during his reign, and lentil soup became a frequent and favored offering. Prepared with olive oil, garlic, carrots, and bay leaf, the soup was thick and hearty. A chunk of coarse bread completed the meal. It wasn't flashy, but it was filling, nutritious, and perfectly in tune with his low-profile leadership style. For Innocent XIII, food wasn't about indulgence. It was sustenance, quiet comfort, and a reminder of one's place in the grand scheme. In a world of feasts, he chose the fast and found fulfillment in the most modest of bowls. A refined and scholarly man, Pope Clement XI enjoyed food as an extension of art and culture. One of his favorites? Stuffed zucchini blossoms, or fiori di zucca ripieni, a delicate and seasonal Roman specialty. Filled with soft cheese, typically ricotta or mozzarella, herbs, and sometimes anchovy, the blossoms were gently fried in olive oil until golden. The dish was light, fragrant, and visually beautiful, often served as an appetizer at papal luncheons or personal meals. Born in Urbino, Clement XI brought a love for elegance and refinement to the papal table. He surrounded himself with artists, writers, and thinkers, and the meals often reflected that aesthetic. These blossoms, which wilt quickly and require a gentle touch, matched his preference for detail, care, and transience. Vatican chefs would source them fresh each morning from local gardens or markets. His appreciation for this fleeting treat showed that even in a life of structure and ceremony, there was room for seasonal joy. and edible beauty. Pope Innocent XII was as frugal with his food as he was with Vatican spending. Known for banning nepotism and excess in church finances, he also preferred one of the simplest snacks of his era, roasted chickpeas. These protein-packed legumes, seasoned with a pinch of salt and rosemary, were often served in bowls during informal meetings or as a midday meal. Born in Naples, Innocent XII enjoyed southern Italian flavors, but avoided rich sauces or multi-course feasts. Chickpeas were cheap, nutritious, and widely available, a people's food that fueled workers, monks, and popes alike. He even had them ground into flour for rustic bread. His modesty extended to his papal kitchen, which he ordered scaled back significantly during his reign. When offered lavish meals, he'd often reply, "This will suffice." A bowl of roasted chickpeas, golden, crisp, and honest, embodied the heart of a pope committed to reform, restraint, and remembering the poor. But now we travel even further back, where medieval popes dined on dishes both curious and surprising. Pope Sixtus IV, patron of the Sistine Chapel, had a taste for something sweet and subtly exotic: almond rice pudding made with honey, milk, and crushed nuts. In the Renaissance era, sugar and almonds were considered luxury ingredients, and this dish reflected wealth and refinement. Inspired by Moorish and Sicilian traditions, it was likely served on feast days or special gatherings. Born Francesco della Rovere in Liguria, Sixtus IV came from humble roots, but became known for his cultural sophistication. Sweet almond rice was both a comfort food and a status symbol, soft, creamy, and perfumed with citrus zest or cinnamon. Recipes varied, but all included soaked rice slowly simmered in milk or almond milk until tender. This papal favorite also made appearances at Vatican banquets, alongside roasted quail or fruit compotes. Though he ruled during turbulent political times, Sixtus IV believed deeply in the beauty of the arts, and his food choices reflected a similar devotion to delicate craftsmanship. Pope Gregory I, later known as Saint Gregory the Great, lived during the fall of the Western Roman Empire and chose to lead with humility and discipline. His favorite food? Simple bread dipped in olive oil. Born into a noble Roman family, Gregory rejected wealth and embraced monastic life, bringing that ascetic spirit into his papacy. During famines and plagues, he regularly fasted and donated food to the poor, often eating only basic fare himself. The bread was coarse and often made from barley or rye, while the olive oil came from nearby groves, sometimes infused with herbs. He viewed food as a tool for survival and spiritual clarity, not pleasure. His austere palate was legendary and profoundly respected. Even as Pope, he modeled a lifestyle that prioritized service over status. For Gregory, the holiest meal wasn't served on silver, but on the same wooden table as the poor and the weary.
Which papal dish would you try first? Or which one surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments.